Hey there, everyone. It's Rob Ryder. June 15th, 2013. That would be a Saturday. Day before Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, all you fathers. What are you guys going to do tomorrow? What needs to be fixed around the house? Seems to be how it works out. For those who've followed me for any length of time, you know that I really started out reading Blackstone's Lord Coke, things like that. That's the early stuff I did, because I was really just trying to figure out what it said, what it meant. Because they say that, our laws here are based on the laws of England. There are those who will say we are under the laws of England. And I'd be one of them. So what we have is, the side of what's going on that we're not seeing. And so in England, there's four superior courts, or four supreme courts, superior courts of England: the Court of Chancery, the Court of Exchequer, the King's Bench, and the Court of Common Pleas. And at some point, they decided that the King's Bench and the Court of Exchequer would follow the King, and that the Court of Common Pleas and the Court of Chancery would stay in one place. And that place at the time was Westminster Abbey. And at the time it was Westminster Abbey, England was a Catholic nation. Because this goes back a long, long way. And Westminster Abbey was established in the 600 AD, 598 AD, something like that. And if you know anything about history of the Christian nations, the bishops were always the right-hand man of the king. They were the king's conscience. And not only that, the monks and abbots were the ones who kept the books, because they were the ones that could be trusted. And so it was a system set up by the Christians, using as much as possible the system of Roman law, which they had Christianized by taking Roman law, which was pagan law at one time, which allowed a false accuser to bring an accusation, to say, well, you can't do that. It's a great system. However, if you're going to bring an accusation, you need to take an oath and bring a couple witnesses. Well, we know that we're not, that isn't what we deal with today. It's all about false accusers. You're simply being accused of a crime by a false accuser. It's that simple. There's nobody who signed a complaint. There's nothing. Nobody will take an oath to say that you've done anything wrong. So, since the laws of England are the way they are, it's the Court of Chancery that was the court of equity, and had the, well, let's just read about it. Let's see what the Court of Chancery could do. So the High Court of Chancery is the only remaining in the matters of civil property, by much the most important of any, in the King's superior and original courts of justice. So of the King's superior and original courts of justice, as far as civil property is concerned, the Court of Chancery is the most important. And what does civil mean? It's used in contrast distinction to barbarous or savage. In other words, the opposite of barbarous or savage. Used in opposite of criminal, and to indicate the private rights and remedies of men as members of a community, in contrast to those which are public and relative to the government. So small c civil is for you to have to indicate the private rights and remedies of men. And civil property, men's property, private property, is the most important. The Court of Chancery is the most important of any, as far as that's concerned, of the King's original courts of justice. A civil death as opposed to a natural death. And see, right now, we are in a civil death, right? Because we don't have any private rights and remedies to men. Now, I've gone through many things in the past that, that are all what they are, just by when you read what it says, that there's no shortage of evidence they're bringing fraud into court. It's what do you do with it? Well, we've been looking for the Court of Justice. In particular, the High Court of Chancery, the King's superior one of the king's superior and original courts of justice, the most important as far as civil property, as to a man's private rights and remedies. So anyways, it has its name of chancery from the judge who presides there, the Lord Chancellor, who, Sardar Koch tells us, is so termed for cancelling the king's letters patents when granted contrary to law, which is the highest point of his jurisdiction. So, one of the things that's happened, because of Cestui Que Vie Act of 1666, you're considered lost across the sea, and you've lost your property. And maybe it's been given to somebody else on a king's letter patent, and when we appear before the chancellor, when we appear before the proper magistrate, show that we're alive, he can cancel that letter patent and give you back your property. Because you have a death certificate saying you're dead right now. Presumed dead, just don't have a toe to put it on yet. But the office name of Chancellor, however derived, is certainly known to the courts of Roman emperors, where originally it was signified a chief scribe or secretary, who was afterwards invested with several judicial powers and general superintendency over the rest of the officers of the prince, the king's right-hand man, the chancellor. Normally, also known as a secretary, would be like a secretary of state. The secretary is the clerk of the secrets. And so, because the Romans knew about it, the bishops knew about it. That's what we're talking about, archbishops. Archbishop of Canterbury in particular. We'll see how he plays into this. From the Roman Empire, it passed to the Roman Church, ever emulous of the imperial state, and hence every bishop has to this day his chancellor, the presiding or principal judge of his consistory. Well, that's what the bishop has. What we want to know is, what does a king have? The king has a chancellor. And the king's gone. When the king's gone, the chancellor steps in for him. Right? Well, there is no king of England right now. Right? And the king of kings isn't here yet. So, when they say that the Pope is the vicar of Christ, he's just the chancellor of Christ. He's there. He's Christ's right-hand man on earth, running the kingdom until he returns. When the modern kingdoms of Europe were established upon the ruins of the empire, almost every state preserved its chancellor with different jurisdiction and dignitaries according to their different constitutions. But in all of them he seems to have had supervision of all charter, letters, and such public instruments of the crown as were authenticated in the most solemn manner, and therefore when seals came into use he was always in custody of the king's great seal. So the chancellor has the great seal. This is nothing new for those who have been following me, right? We know it's a chancellor, got the great seal, but if they're talking about the dude in Canterbury, right, he has offices all over the place, and so they have the great seal. It's a common seal someplace. So the office of Chancellor, or the Lord Keeper, whose authority in Elizabeth 5 C18 is declared to be exactly the same, so the Lord Keeper is the same as office of Chancellor. Call him Lord Keeper, you found the office of Chancellor. We're looking for the office of Chancellor. Possibly. And the thing about the Chancellor in a, well, how would that be true? Because in the diocese, in these cathedrals, they have a chancery. And I believe the chancellor of the diocese is also over the chancery, which is where the records are kept. That's what's going to be the important thing real soon, right? Where your records are determines your status, because it's going to determine the jurisdiction that you're in. Writ patent, an officer of the greatest weight and importance. Sorry, he's a bad motherfucker. Right? He's the top man in the kingdom. The chancellor is. He's the procurator of the House of Lords by prescription. He belongs the appointment of all. To him belongs the appointment of all justices of the peace throughout the kingdom. So you want to know who the justices of the peace are within a particular diocese? You got to find the chancellor of that diocese. Now, way back when, a couple of years ago, a brother in England named Laz wanted to get a certificate of authority for a notary in England. And to get it there, you had to go to, guess where, Westminster Abbey, to see who? The Lord Archbishop of Canterbury. That's what his seal says, Lord Archbishop of Canterbury, to get a certificate of authority to say that notary was a notary. And the funny thing is that, I told the story before, but this is where Laz had to have a friend of his in England, or in London, go get it for him. And the court closes at 4, and they had called to get one, and they said, "Oh, we'll stay open late for you," and met him at the door with the certificate of authority after hours. Very, very unusual for courts to stay open after hours, except for extenuating circumstances. Although they will try to drag you into court after hours, right? If that court stops at 11 and stops at 4, anything happening after 11 before it starts again and after 4 isn't in court. Just happened to Rich, and a story I told earlier, and happened to a buddy of theirs a year and a half ago when he had a court time that said be back at 4:30. There is no court at 4:30. Court closes at 4. It's a bank. The window goes down at 11 o'clock and at 4 o'clock. Okay, so being formally usually an ecclesiastic, right, a bishop, and formally means correctly, being correctly or normally or lawfully, usually an ecclesiastic, for none else were then capable of an office so conversant in writings, because it's all about the records, and presiding over the royal chapel, he became the keeper of the king's conscience. Visitor in the right of the king, of all hospitals, colleges, of the king's foundation, who were all born in hospitals, and patron of all the king's livings under the value of 20 per annum in the king's books. All the king's livings. I wonder what the king's livings is, under the value of 20 pounds. He is the general guardian of all infants, idiots, and lunatics, and has the general superintendence of all charitable uses in the kingdom. He's over the infants and the idiots and the lunatics. Maybe more than just, one kind of hospital we're talking about here. Orphanages. What's the difference between an idiot and a lunatic? Why would they have them both? One would mean you're mad. The other one, I guess, just means you're unconscious and stupid. And all this over and above the vast extent of jurisdiction which he exercises in his judicial capacity in the Court of Chancery, wherein, as in the Exchequer, there are two distinct tribunals, the one ordinary being a court of common law, the other extraordinary being a court of equity. Alright, so I'm putting different parts of different things in. This isn't just straight out of any one thing, so... But here's another part in Blackstone where he's talking about a kind of court. So, before I descend to consider particular ecclesiastic courts, because again, we're talking about something that's run by an ecclesiastic, right? Court of Chancery is an ecclesiastic court. But there's other kinds of ecclesiastic courts, because it just means it's a particular religion's court. Before I descend to consider particular ecclesiastic courts, I must first of all, in general, premise that in the time of our Saxon ancestors, there was no sort of distinction between lay and ecclesiastical jurisdiction. The county court was as much a spiritual as a temporal tribunal. There was no separation of church and state in the county court, and there still isn't. The rights of the church were ascertained and asserted at the same time and by the same judges as the rights of the laity. The county court was a spiritual and temporal court. That's where the bishop sits. For this purpose, the bishop of the diocese and the alderman, or in his absence, the sheriff of the county, the alderman or the sheriff of the county, used to sit together in the county court, small c county court, and had there the cognizance in all causes, as well ecclesiastical as civil. So, this was out of Virginia. Courts of civil and ecclesiastic. The rule is well settled that the civil courts will not enforce the judgments of an ecclesiastic court, but where the parties, by a valid agreement, constitute an ecclesiastic court, the arbitrator between them, and agree to abide by its decision as an award, the civil courts will enforce the award. That's what they're doing to us. They're constituting an ecclesiastic court. That's why them guys are wearing robes. And the arbitrator, the judge, and we agree to the arbitrator between us, and we agree to abide by its decision. The problem is that guy who's the arbitrator is asking you if you're Mr. Ritluski, and if you say yes, or you don't say, don't call me Mr., I'm a Christian, they're going to say you're not a Christian. They don't have any proof that you're a Christian. So then what other ecclesiastic courts are there? There's the court of the Pharisee, the court of the Jew, the court of the cult of Rome that prayed to the emperor. All sorts of ecclesiastic courts. It's just a church court, whatever the faith is. We don't want to be in their ecclesiastical court. If we want to be in one, for myself, I want to be in a Christian ecclesiastical court, because in that court, it says if you're going to bring a claim against somebody, you need to have 2 witnesses and take an oath. And so do they. And that is not the court that you're in. But you are in an ecclesiastical court of some kind, and they're going to get you to consent to the arbitrator and the decision as an award between them, and guess what? You're not going to win. A guy named Ted Pike has a video out called The Other Israel. It'll tell you all about the law of the Pharisee and how they feel about Gentiles. And to a Pharisee who's a Gentile, everybody who's not a Pharisee. And you will not win in their court. Period. That's why these courts have Judeo-Christian beliefs. Otherwise, how could you have them both? Either you believe God was here in the man of Jesus Christ, or he wasn't. Either he's your Redeemer, or he isn't. Well, so for the Christians, it's the same way. If you're not a Christian, you're a Gentile. So you need to tell them who you are. And better yet, we're going to make it public record. A superior defense being paid to the bishop's opinion in spiritual matters and to what the law judge in temporal, the union of power was very advantageous to them both. The presence of the bishop added weight. Reverence to the sheriff's proceedings and the authority of the sheriff was equally useful to the bishop by enforcing obedience to his decrees of such refractory offenders as would otherwise have despised the thunder of mere ecclesiastic censures. Right? And what I want is I want to have the thunderous wrath of the Vatican rain down upon somebody. County history. This is what came out of Illinois about county history. This is on a county website. The Anglo-Saxon roots of the county. The county, as a unit of government, has its roots in Anglo-Saxon tradition. About 1,000 years ago, units similar to counties were the main form of local government in France and England. The usefulness arose from their feudal nature of medieval Europe. He who had the land, right, ruled. If you weren't a landowner, you worked on the land, and you never left your station of life. If you weren't a landowner now, you weren't going to be one later. Although there was little government as we know it today, the church, in combination with the landed nobility, was the governing power. They owned all the property. Now the church, right, they used their land holdings to help the poor. But the landed nobility, they wanted them church holdings because they had a lot of really good land. Well, back in the old days, Catholic Church just didn't want to give it up. Imagine. They had been given this land by successive kings in England since the 1st or 2nd century. Actually, probably close to the 5th century. However, there were monasteries in England all the way back to just about the beginning of the 2nd century, it'd be 100 AD. So always been Christians in England since the beginning. But now we're not talking the same church. That church was kicked out, right? They had to put in something better. They came up with whatever they got now. But so a moderate rational plan was wholly inconsistent with the views of ambition, in other words, letting the church have anything to do with it, that were formerly by the court of Rome, it soon became established maxim, the papal system of policy, that all ecclesiastical persons and ecclesiastical causes should be solely entirely subject to ecclesiastic jurisdiction only. In other words, if you're a priest, you should only go to a priest's court, not to a civil court. That's going to be important, right? We're going to an ecclesiastic court as a Mr. Pagan, or even as a civil court as a priest, because by baptism you were made a high priest. And priests are to be honored by the kings, not judged. So how can I say you're a priest? Well, because in the Code of Canon Law, 1983, Roman Rite, the Christ faithful, Canon 204, Christ faithful are those who, since they are incorporated into Christ through baptism, are constituted the people of God. For this reason, they participate in their own way in the priestly, prophetic, and kingly office of Christ. If you didn't know it, Christ is an office. Claim it. They are called, each according to his own particular condition, to exercise the mission which God entrusted to the church to fulfill in the world. The church established the order in this world as a society, subsist in the Catholic Church, governed by the successor of Peter and his bishops in communion with him. Beautiful. This didn't say you had to be baptized a Catholic. It says you had to be baptized a Christian. And when you read Code of Canon Law, if you would take the time to read it, you would see that's what it says. If you have been baptized, you are holding the priestly, prophetic, and kingly office of Christ if you just do something with it, instead of waiting for somebody else to save you. West Michigan Diocese. Now we're going to flip. So this other one was the one we just looked at was, right, the Vatican's canon law. This West Michigan Diocese Canon 1 definition comes from the Episcopal Church. D. A communicant in good standing shall include all persons who have received the sacrament of holy baptism with water in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Robert Allen. Whether in this church or in another Christian church, and whose baptism has been duly recorded in this church. Why is this important? Well, because this Episcopal Church, as we see, is tied directly back to the Anglican Church of England, which is who the Archbishop of Canterbury is the Archbishop of, who makes him the Chancellor of the Court of Chancery. And there's our English law at work right now. We're trying to get a civil remedy. You have to remember the Court of Chancery is part of the civil government. It's not an ecclesiastic court. It's one of the superior courts of England. It is the civil government. An adult communicant in good standing in a congregation. So this is the difference, right? Here, just to be a communicant in good standing, you can be from any Christian church as long as you are baptized with water in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and have your baptism duly recorded in this church being the Anglican Church. If you don't do it, you're not going to be seen as a Christian. The civil law of England will not see you as a Christian because you didn't record your documents with the Archbishop of Canterbury, basically. Now, way back when, less than 100 years ago, this Right Reverend G.O.D. Gillespie was the chairman, and he was the archbishop, or he was the bishop of this particular diocese here in Michigan back in 1905. I think there was only one back then. It was just the Diocese of Michigan, and he was in Grand Rapids, and he was also the chairman of the State Board of Corrections and Charities. Well, there's that thing about charities. Corrections. This isn't, a different time in his life. This is when he was a bishop in the Episcopal Church. He was the chairman of the State Board of Corrections, right? He's the guy over the prisons. And charities. I wonder what kind of charities they had. there was also the superintendent of the state public school there. At the time, there was only one public school. Now we got them all over the place. And then public schools weren't put there for your benefit. Right? There's a public school was meant for like a truant or an idiot or a lunatic or, think about it. Home of discharged prisoners. Sounds like probation. And then I hesitate to speak to you tonight because there is one here who experiences the years of character entitle him to speak at my words, at least. Anyways, this is some guy really beating his chest for Bishop Gillespie. And where is it? But it's not on here. Oh, shoot. Hopefully it shows up. He was, there we go. It's this guy right here. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Board of Corrections and Charities, that's who he's talking to. He's the Honorable C.B. Grant, Justice of this Michigan Supreme Court. So a Justice of the Supreme Court is having they're meeting at a county agent's get-together, and he's going to have a talk, but before he talks, he has to hesitate to speak because there's somebody who's been at it a lot longer than him, and his name is Bishop Gillespie. Well, this bishop is over a church. We know the judge is over a court. If you can't see that that one is tied to the other, I don't know what I can do for you. It's just what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to keep on going. That's what we're going to do about it. All right, so this comes out of so I can close these up. Hang on here. Constitutions and canons, together with rules and order for the government of the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States of America, otherwise known as the Episcopal Church. And there's their seal. They got the sign of the cross. I'd like to see that. They got the Pope's mitre up there. Isn't that interesting? And this is since 1785. They've been around a while. Until then, it had just been the Church of England here. But, then we had this thing called the Revolution, and the Church of England had to go. So they changed the name to something else. And it's still the Church of England. That's what it says in that preamble. The Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States of America, otherwise known as the Episcopal Church, which name is hereby recognized, also designated the Church, is a constituent member of the Anglican communion, a fellowship with the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and those duly constituted dioceses, provinces, and regional churches in communion with the See of Canterbury. And who's over the See of Canterbury? Well, the Archbishop of Canterbury. And the Archbishop of Canterbury is over the actually both, the Court of Common Pleas and the Court of Chancery. It's just, is it the Archbishop or is it somebody like the Lord Keeper? Not the Archbishop, but somebody now they call the Lord Keeper who has the same powers. It's not so much getting wrapped up in exactly who they are, just the idea of what powers that the office has and why it's so important to find that office. This Constitution, adopted by the General Convention of Philadelphia, 1789, government of the Church and its overseas missionary jurisdictions. Articles of the government of this church and its overseas missionary jurisdictions. Well, this is an offshoot of the Church of England. And so who'd they have the Constitution with? It must have been the Church of England. The Church of England gave this church its marching orders to its overseas missionary jurisdiction, which is the United States of America. What's it say? Baptism is not only a sign of profession and a mark of difference whereby Christian men are discerned from others that be not christened, but it is also a sign of regeneration or new birth. Born again, whereby, as by an instrument, a document, they that receive baptism rightly are grafted into the church, the promises of forgiveness of sin and of our adoption to the be the sons of God by the Holy Ghost are visibly signed and sealed. Signed, sealed. We got a baptismal certificate. Faith is confirmed, the grace increased by virtue of prayer unto God. You need to give them a copy of your baptismal certificate. The baptism of younger children is, in its anywise, to be retained in the church and is most agreeable to the institution of Christ. Christ likes them young. Get them in before they get tainted by the secular world. Of the power of the civil magistrates, which now you have to remember, they have a Supreme Court judge who's a civil magistrate is talking about how he learned at the knee of this bishop, basically, who had baptized all his children and so forth. So the power of the Supreme Court, the power of the civil magistrates extendeth to all men, as well clergy as laity, in all things temporal, but hath no authority in things purely spiritual. And we hold it to be duly the duty of all men who are professors of the gospel to pay respectful obedience to the civil authority regularly and legitimately constituted. Yes, we must render unto Caesar what is Caesar. Caesar represented the civil authority. We must give him our obedience to a Christian magistrate. Render unto Caesar what's Caesar. That's given to the civil. Render unto God what's God. Well, what does God want? He wants prayers. Right? He wants your love. He wants honor the Father, heart, mind, and soul. Treat your brother like you treat yourself. So you're not a false accuser. Yet we run into that all the time. Now in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus finishes that off by saying, he says, render unto Caesar what's Caesar, render unto God what's God's, and render unto me what's mine. He's not talking about himself. He's talking about you saying that. Render unto me what's mine. I'll give Caesar. I will follow the law. I will love my God. And now give me what's mine. Because of Christians' man's goods, which are not common. The riches and goods of Christians are not common as touching the right, title, and possession of the same. They're not common. They're yours. You have the proprietary right. However, certain Anabaptists falsely boast, apparently, right, that they are common. What the hell's an Anabaptist? They think that my property is their property? That sounds like a communist. Notwithstanding, every man ought, of such things as he possesses, liberally to give alms to the poor according to his abilities. Right? If you got more than you need, give some away. Because there should be plenty for everybody if we just quit hoarding. And that's obvious because all the money, that people who think there's money, is in the bank. Yet we're still all alive. So I guess we don't really need it all, but we could sure all get along better if we had a little bit more between us. Of the Christian's man's oath, as we confess that vain and rash swearing is forbidden, Christian men, by our Lord Jesus Christ and James his apostle, so we judge that Christian religion doth not prohibit, but that a man may swear when the magistrate requireth, in cause of faith and charity. So it be done according to the prophet's teaching and justice, judgment, and truth. If you're in court, you got nothing better to say, I swear on oath, I am innocent. If they're not going to take this, you just say, you're going to call me a liar. You don't need to be you don't need to wait to be put under oath. Tell them. You swear on oath that you're innocent, that there is no contract between you and the plaintiff. Now the plaintiff has to produce one. And this is a different part of the Constitution. The original 1571, so this is pretty old text, the 1662 text of this article reads as follows. The King's Majesty hath the chief power in the realm of England, and other his domains, the United States of America, unto whom the chief government of all estates of this realm, whether they be ecclesiastic or civil, in all causes due or pertaineth, and is not nor not be subject to any foreign jurisdiction. The civil government, the Court of Chancery, is the chief government of all estates of this realm. They can determine who's the owner. Where we attribute to the King's Majesty the chief government by which titles, we understand the minds of some slanderous folks. To be offended, we give not our princes the ministerial either of God's word or the sacraments, in which thing the injunctions also lately set forth by Elizabeth our Queen do so most plainly testify. You got to remember, when they kicked the church out, King Henry VIII said that, basically he was the spiritual leader of the church. That led to a lot of problems. A few divorces, a couple heads cut off. Just another day in the kingdom. But that only prerogative, which we seem to have always given, do all godly princes in the Holy Scriptures by God Himself, that is, that they should rule all the states by degrees committed to their charge by God. So they should rule all the states and degrees committed to their charge by God, whether they be ecclesiastic or temporal, and restrain with civil sword the stubborn and evildoers. I think we're the stubborn, right? We won't go tell them we're Christians. The Bishop of Rome, the Pope, hath no jurisdiction in the realm of England. Quit blaming the Vatican. The Bishop of Rome hath no jurisdiction in this realm of England, nor the United States. The laws of the realm may punish Christian men with death for heinous and grievous offenses. So they had better watch out when we get it figured out. Because there's a lot of good Christians that pray all day Sunday and then pray on you all week, come in and bear false witness against you. They don't have anything signed. They don't have anything. They're trying to get you to agree. Basically, you gave them a donation, and now you're welching on your charitable gift. It is lawful for Christian men, at the commandment of the magistrate, to wear weapons and serve in the wars. Some more things here. We, the bishops of the Protestant Episcopal Church, United States of America, Council of Assembled Bishops in the Church of God, do hereby solemnly declare to all whom may concern, especially our fellow Christians of the different communions of this land, such as Catholics, who in their several spheres have contended for the religion of Christ, our earnest desire that the Savior's prayer that we may all be one may, in its deepest and truest sense, be speedily fulfilled. That we believe that all who have been duly baptized with water in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost are members of the Holy Catholic Church. You're part of the Catholic Church. Get over it. In early Christianity, there were only altars and priests. Go all the way back to the beginning. Altars and priests. They didn't have no podiums. It didn't happen. And there were bishops. You can go read the first century text. Eusebius, what is it? History of the Church. Just put History of the Church into YouTube and you find like 35, it's an audio book basically, so you can find the audio book, but it's Eusebius on the early church. He's writing in the 3rd or 4th, actually the 4th century, early 300s. And one of the things he says in there, and this is during his time, that there was a king in another country, and he named the country, but it meant nothing to me at the time, who wrote Jesus a letter and basically said, hey, them Jews there, they want to kill you. Why don't you come here? We'll protect you. Come heal our sick. We believe in you, right? And Jesus basically, so Jesus wrote him back and said, thanks for the offer. I've got my own destiny, but after I've fulfilled what I've come here for, I will send one of my apostles, one of my disciples, to heal your sick and help your poor. Well, Eusebius is saying that this letter from the king and the response from Christ are still in the archives of this particular country at that day, which is in the 3rd century. Christ wrote a letter. Go figure. Or at least subscribed it. He probably had one of the scribes do it for him. And so anyways, to finish the story, after Christ died, the Apostle Thomas went there and healed the king and his sick. But furthermore, we do hereby affirm that the Christian unity can be restored only by the return of Christian communions to the principles of unity exemplified by the divided Catholic Church under the first ages of its existence. And in the first ages there were altars and priests, and they had pictures and candles, and they had it all done up. Man, it was a spiritual experience. where on every Sunday they all would say the same prayers for the same reason. And does that mean anything? I don't know. Quick story. 1955, Russia invades Austria. Now, they hadn't invaded Hungary yet, they hadn't invaded Yugoslavia, but they had invaded Austria. Woke up one day, because all these things are right next to each other. There's a Russian tank sitting at the stoplight. I guess we've been invaded. Well, now this is, Stalin, who killed 50 million Catholics. Don't hear much about that. Over 50 million Catholics in Russia during the Christian purges, is now in Austria. And he hasn't gone into Hungary yet, and we know Hungary got the shit bombed out of them. They did get the brutal end of the stick. So did Yugoslavia. Well, a Catholic priest in Austria decided to do a pilgrimage, and he walked around all of Austria, beautiful country by the way, visited all the church, and convinced as many as he could to say the rosary every day. And so it's estimated he got maybe 10% of the people of Austria to say the rosary, every day. For whatever reason, the Russians soon afterwards got in their tanks and drove out of the country. A shot was never fired. Now, they did go pummel the shit out of Hungary and Yugoslavia, but they didn't do anything to Austria. I don't know, saying the rosary had anything to do with it, but that is what happened. The power of prayer. Which principles we believe the substantial deposit of Christian faith in order committed to Christ by his apostles to the church unto the end of the world, and therefore incapable of compromise or surrender by those who have been ordained to be its stewards and trustees for the common and equal benefit of all therein. As inherent parts of the sacred deposit, and therefore as essential sacred deposit, right? We're talking the sacred trust, not the public trust, or your graces, and therefore as essential to the restoration of unity among the divided branches of Christendom, we account the following to wit. The Holy Scriptures, the Old and New Testament, are the relevant Word of God. The Nicene Creed as the sufficient statement of Christian faith. If you can live in the Nicene Creed, you are a Christian. The two sacraments, baptism and the supper of the Lord, ministered with the unfailing use of Christ's words of institution and the elements ordained by him. Do it the way Christ said. The historic episcopate, locally adapted in its methods of its administration to the varying needs of the nations and peoples called of God into the unity of the church. And this historical episcopate is interesting. We'll get into that in just a second. Furthermore, deeply grieved by the sad division which affect the Christian church in our land, we hereby declare our desire and readiness as soon as there shall be any authorized response to this declaration to enter into brotherly conference with all or any Christian bodies, as in one Christian body, seeking the restoration of an organic unity of the church, with a view to the earnest study of conditions under which so priceless a blessing might happily be brought to pass. And that's the journey we've been on. I think it's as simple. You need to take your baptismal certificate and have it duly recorded in an Episcopal church, in their vestry, in their diocese. I don't know. We're going to find out. I emailed my parish I was baptized in on Friday, and we'll see what they have for me Monday. So that's the view of the Anglicans, right? The Episcopal Church. And they talk about this thing called the historic episcopate. And so this guy named R.J. Cook, D.D. Methodist Episcopal Church, is what he was part of. He wrote a book about historical episcopate. So he says Methodist Episcopal Church. I googled to see what he was, because when I looked at this, I was kind of astonished. All right, this guy writes this book. But where's the cross? Come on. All right, here's the symbol he put on his book. I don't see no cross on that one. I'd say these folks, if I didn't know better, if I didn't, well, I'm going to say they are anyways, even though they say that they are Methodist Episcopal Church, right? It sure looks Jewish to me. I don't know what to tell you. You see any crosses on there, any crucifixes? I don't see the Virgin Mary anywhere. Don't see any saints. I see 7 candlesticks. Like somebody's still waiting for Jesus to come the first time. Go figure. So what do you have to say about this? So, that apparently, if that's a symbol of a Methodist Episcopal Church, I guess it is. All I know is the dude put it on his book. And he was a member of the Methodist Episcopal Church. And he wrote this in a book about historic episcopate. Isolated from the Greek and Latin communions, right? The Latin and Greek, the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic churches, by insurmountable barriers and maintaining a rigid exclusiveness toward Protestant churches, the established Church of England and its offshoot, the Protestant Episcopal Church, hold a position among churches of Christendom which is unique as it is untenable. So this is the Protestant Episcopal Church, and this guy's from the Methodist Episcopal Church. Wow. Too many churches. The Anglican Church, in which term, for convenience, we include the Church of England and the Protestant Episcopal Church, so that is the Anglican Church now, acknowledges the claims of the Roman and Greek churches to apostolic succession and the validity of sacerdotal character of their ministry. So the Anglican churches believe that the Romans and the Greeks are correct, that there is an apostolic succession. But neither of these communions, being the Roman Catholic or Greek Orthodox, in return recognize in any degree Anglican claims to the succession or regards to its valid ministerial orders. Yeah, we agree, you're absolutely right, Anglican Church. There is an apostolic succession. We just don't agree that you have one. That's beautiful stuff. These orders are rejected by those churches as spurious, as defective both in matter of and in form, and the church itself as being without mission or jurisdiction. Right. It ain't there to be a church, it's there to be the civil government. They've already told you where the church is. It's the Catholic Church. The relation which the Greek and Latin churches maintain a theological and canonical grounds for the Anglican communion, that church, singularly enough, now holds toward all churches of the Reformation. So in relation, so the way that the Greeks and the Latins feel about the Anglicans feel the same way about the other Protestant churches. Protestant churches generally admit on evangelical principles the sacred character of the Anglican orders, without assenting, however, to the unhistoric dogma of apostolic succession or the assumptions to a priestly character of the Anglican ministry. How can you not believe in apostolic succession? I think you people need to go read your history. Eusebius, History of the Church. Or, how about the Ecclesiastic History of England by the Venerable Bede, both on audiobook. Venerable Bede, B-E-D-E, I think it is. The Ecclesiastic History of of England, where you can hear about St. Alban, who was the first martyr in England, about early 200s, I guess. And so when the Romans came to get him, because this is, during the persecution time, sometimes Romans loved Christians, other times other ones didn't. During this particular time, they didn't. And they went to execute him, because he wouldn't renounce Christ. And there were so many people over the bridge that they couldn't walk across it, so St. Alban stopped the waters. And as soon as he did that, the guy that was going to execute him dropped his sword and said he couldn't do it. Take my life instead. It took him a while to figure out what to do, but St. Alban said, come on, it's a good day to be a martyr. And they went across the now dry riverbed, the river still stopped, up to a side of the hill. St. Alban was thirsty. He asked God to give him a drink, and that's where the river came out, where he was standing. And so he got a drink, and then the river went away, and then the river down where the river should be started running again. And so another executioner had to chop off his head. And the way the story goes, the guy who chopped off St. Albans' head, his eyeballs hit the ground the same time that the saint's head did. Somebody popped his eyes out of his head. Strange things back in the day. But back to our little squabble here in the Protestant religion. The Protestant churches generally admit, okay, we know they do that. But the Anglican Church rejects the orders of all other Protestant churches. In other words, says there aren't any, whether in England, in Holland, in Sweden, or Germany, or in this country, and forgetting its origin, set up its exclusive claim against them of being the one true Church of God, and alone possessing a valid ministry, and therefore having the sole divine right to administer the Christian sacraments according to the Holy Commandment. Now remember, the guy that's bitching about this has got, I believe that's the menorah, is it not? Forgive me, I don't really remember. It's got 7 candlesticks on it. Yeah. But the Anglican, okay, so a guy with 7 candlesticks is complaining about the Anglican Church that has the sign of the cross on their emblem. Crazy. Let it be conceded that there has come down from the apostle an unbroken. So now this is the same guy with the 7 candlesticks saying, let it be conceded that there has come down from the apostles an unbroken succession of bishops, and that this succession continues and is at force at present. Let it be granted further that the Roman and Greek churches are in possession, as Anglicans assert, of this succession. The question before us then are, so first of all, the guy just said, okay, you're right, there is an unbroken succession. And you're right, it is the Greeks and the Roman Catholic Church that have it. But what he wants to know is, does the Church of England or the Protestant Episcopal Church possess this same succession? He's not denying that it's true, that is absolutely true, that there is a succession, and that it is that of the Romans and the Greek churches, the Catholic churches. He just wants to know how come the Episcopals, think that they have it. And he's going to spend the rest of this book proving that they don't. Have these churches tried by the principles they lay down for other churches a truly valid ministry? Now, since the Church of England, the Protestant Episcopal Church, by insisting upon a theory of succession, which by them has been made an article of belief equal to revealed doctrine, reject the validity of ordination in all other Protestant churches, the right to challenge these Anglican principles, the validity of orders in the established church, and its American offshoot can neither be questioned nor denied. These churches possess no character or authority which would entitle them to the exemption from trial on their own principles. So these churches, okay, so how is this going? Now, since the Church of England, Protestant Episcopal Church, insisting upon a theory of succession, okay, reject the validity of ordination in all the other Protestant churches. Yep, none of you guys are valid. The right to challenge on these same Anglican principles of validity of orders of the established. You can't challenge this either. Can neither be questioned or denied. These churches possess no character or authority which entitle them to exemption from trial on their own principles. These churches possess no character or authority that would entitle them to exemption from trial. Exemption from trial. See, priests are exempted from trial in a civil court. You have to go to a priest court, an ecclesiastic court of your religion. And that's why you want, if you're a Christian, when you were baptized, you became a high priest, and you can claim the priestly, prophetic, and kingly office of Christ. And once you do, now you can only be tried in a Christian court. Not where these crazy fuckers are, man. The Judeo-Christian beliefs, they don't know who they are. They're going to get you to try to consent to being a mister so you can be a pagan. That's crazy. It cannot be quietly assumed that the Church of England is undoubtedly founded on historic, legitimate episcopate. All right, it can't be assumed they have a legitimate episcopate, and therefore it possesses the right to lay down imperative conditions for other churches. Right? So how can you talk about us when you don't have one? Before it or the Protestant Episcopal Church can lawfully presume to do this, it must produce its own undoubted credentials and must make good, without any element of ingratitude in its evidence, its own high claims to authorized succession. Upon what, then, does the claim of historic episcopate in the Church of England rest? As a historic fact, it rests solely on the validity of the sacramental character of Matthew Parker's consecration to the Archiepiscopal See of Canterbury. And so this Matthew Parks was put in there by Queen Elizabeth after Henry was in. He kicked the Catholics out. Mary came back. She put the Catholics back in. Elizabeth came. She kicked the Catholics back out. It's been that way ever since. Matthew Parks was her first Archbishop of Canterbury. The problem was he wasn't properly ordained, because you need to be truly and canonically ordained, and he wasn't. It takes bishops who have been canonically ordained to ordain another bishop, and there weren't any left. And the ones that were wouldn't do it. They'd rather sit in prison. Right? Because they weren't going to worry about going to prison for their faith in God. Unlike a lot of people who don't seem to have any faith and are only worried about going to jail because they may say something to offend the judge. Well, fuck him. Right? Look at these crazy bastards that run the United States of America. In a couple of months, you know where they're going to be? They're going to be out in Bohemian Grove worshiping an owl. Ay, ay, ay. Its orders on the same principles like those of other churches are null and void. This dude right here, brothers and sisters, of whatever church he was, Methodist Episcopal Church, is saying its orders on the same principles like those of other churches are null and void. All those churches are null and void. There's only two true churches: Greek Orthodox, Roman Catholic. If you want to know what the original Mass looked like from the very earliest times, you go look at the Greek Orthodox. That's what they do. They maintain the same ritual that there was from the beginning of time, beginning of Christianity. And they love their icons. So, anyway, I don't know what to tell you guys, but number one, it seems to me what England is playing in this role is the civil authority of Rome. And when we give them our certificate to show we've been baptized, then we will be treated as in the Holy Roman See, as one of their disciples or one of their citizens, instead of in this unconscious man soup that we find ourselves in that is run by the false accuser. Right? You got the unholy trinity of a false accuser, a scribe, and a frickin' Pharisee determining your fate. And well, I'm gonna see if I can do something about that. So one of the next thing for me is to get my because I can, I'm gonna get my baptismal record and my confirmation record, and head on down to the local Episcopal church and say I need to have this duly recorded in your church, so that the Archbishop of Canterbury knows that I'm a Christian, and you son of bitches quit calling me mister. There'll be no doubt that I'm a Christian, and I'm claiming the office of Christ. So, one last thing. I don't know how much time I have left. This goes out. Do you know that Revelation already happened? St. John, who wrote the Revelation, wrote it in Greek. He was actually imprisoned by Nero between 58 AD and 68 AD when Nero reigned. And because of that, what he was seeing in his visions was the fall of Jerusalem that Jesus had already foretold when he said, within a generation, no wall will stand. And that would have been 70 AD. And when you look at it that way, and you look at all the Bible ties between the New Testament and the Old Testament, you will see very clearly that the whore is Jerusalem. It's her fourth time at it. She's not been a very good girl. Because somewhere in there it says where they killed